with an exceptional group of 5 individuals who have each done a kind of thought piece on a topic of their choice. And we're just going to burn through these in series. We're going to kick off with David Zipper, who's going to talk about tactics to reduce urban vehicle speeds. So David, floor is yours.
Thank you. I've got this. And do I get a clicker? I got a clicker. Thank you. Good afternoon. Sorry to cut the break short, but it's good to be with everyone again. As John mentioned, I wanted to zero in on ways that cities can reduce urban vehicle speeds. And I think why I'm interested in this is kind of intuitive. US has a pretty terrible problem with pedestrian deaths. It is a unique problem around the Western world. There's no other country that's seeing the sort of spike in pedestrian deaths over the last several decades that the US has. We actually hit a few years ago a 40-year high. We actually had more pedestrian deaths since the Carter administration. And that sort of crisis in pedestrian deaths is really an urban crisis. The number of pedestrians who are dying in rural roads has been relatively steady, but the deaths on urban streets and urban roads has been rising sharply. And also I should note, the same holds true, although I'm not going to talk about it a whole lot, for cyclist deaths. We also hit a 40-plus year high in cyclist deaths in the US recently. So we're doing something wrong, and I'd like to find ways to save lives. So why zero in on speed? Well, I think that also can make a lot of sense to those here who have looked at street safety and road safety. Speed plays an enormous role in whether a collision between an automobile or a driver, I should say, and a pedestrian is survivable. The chart here is from a 2011 study by AAA that I think really hits the high points well, saying on average, if a pedestrian is struck by a vehicle that is moving at 39 miles per hour, 3 times out of 4, that pedestrian is dead. If it's only 31 miles per hour, 50-50 shot if the pedestrian survives. And if it's 23 miles per hour, you have basically 3 out of 4 people who are struck are going to be able to live through it. So a relatively modest decrease in vehicle speeds can dramatically impact survivability of a crash. And of course, these sorts of pedestrian-involved crashes are happening disproportionately in urban areas, because that's where people are walking largely, and that's where we're seeing the surge in the US over recent years. So what I wanted to do is basically look at the landscape of the ways in which cities can affect urban vehicle speed. Now, to be clear, there are ways that the federal government and states can do so, like, for example, mandating intelligent speed assist, which NTSB has recommended and NHTSA has completely ignored. Or states could could remove the licenses of people who are chronic speeders. Those are state initiatives, but cities have a lot of tools at their disposal. Just to offer a few examples here, you can adjust the speed limit, you can adjust traffic signalization, you can adjust infrastructure, meaning a road diet or installing speed humps and speed tables and the like. You can do more enforcement, whether it's automatic enforcement or a burst of police-based enforcement. You can do PSA communications announcements like this one from NYC DOT in the bottom left, or you can do some of the sort of more new and emerging ideas like installing, for example, intelligent speed assist on city-owned fleet vehicles, which a very small number of cities are doing. But these are all various ways that a municipality itself can take actions to slow down cars and increase survivability of collisions. So what I did was did a lit review to understand the efficacy of these various tactics and what's been studied and examined by researchers. But on top of that, what I really want to get into, there's a good research about that, but what there's not good research about that I could find was about the politics of implementing these measures. What is politically sensitive? What is more popular? And so I interviewed 11 city DOT directors across the country or senior staff across the country who are on the front lines, and I asked them, these are cities from 100,000 up to 1 million or so, and asked them basically what do you get a ton of pushback for? And what is actually relatively popular? I didn't know what I was going to get, but I was very curious to learn. And the full memo has a lot more information. It's going to come out shortly. So I'm going to only really hit like sort of embarrassingly high-level highlights in the interest of time, because I fear Bhuvan coming up with that siren. Bhuvan scares me. But with the Harvey balls, this is really a high-level summary. But I'm going to hit the high points here are that by and large, the efficacy of these measures is very, very high. It actually, what the research showed, aligned with what the city DOT directors told me, with the important exception of communications like public service announcements, which do not work. Everything else is relatively effective. Some a little bit more than others based on the research and based on the feedback that I got. But a lot of them, like road diets and speed humps and automatic speed cameras, are phenomenally effective. The costs range dramatically, which I'm not going to spend time on here. But again, the other point that I found fascinating was that I expected to hear a lot more about public pushback when I talked to the city DOT directors, based on stuff that you read in the news and what have you. By and large, these were the measures here were relatively popular. I was surprised by this time and time again, whether it's someone from the Midwest, the Northeast, the West Coast. The director said, honestly, it's the news that makes things like police-based enforcement or a road diet seem deeply controversial. When you actually go talk to residents, including in low-income minority neighborhoods, the vast majority of people know that their lives are at risk because of speeding cars or speeding drivers, and they want something to be done. I found that discrepancy really interesting. So, oh God, I've got 2 seconds left. Highlights. Can you Bhuvan, throw me a bone. Give me like 20 seconds, because you took out my prep time here. They are, like I was mentioning, by and large, they're more popular than I expected, and they are effective, although context specific. What works in a road diet context will not work with a speed hump, and vice versa. The three that were really standouts to me were traffic signal adjustments, because this means basically like adjusting the signals so that to hit sort of like a stream of greens, you've got to go a little bit slower. Drivers don't even notice it, and it's dramatically effective. Speed humps people love because they think it's going to slow down cars from elsewhere. And road diets actually really are like the only way to deal with a really dangerous intersection that induces driving. And then the last one is that enforcement that is both police and camera-based is not as controversial as media makes you think. I found this so interesting and so consistent in both the research that I could find and the feedback that I got from the city DOT directors, that I wrote a whole article about it in Bloomberg, basically saying automatic enforcement is, like I said, more popular than you think. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Hello. So I'm going to ask your forbearance. I've been traveling way too much, and I read this fantastic definition of jet lag, which is that when you travel too much, you leave your soul behind. And jet lag is the feeling of your soul trying to catch up with you. So I think that's where I am at the moment. I am working on this somewhat half-baked idea of trying to understand the implication of AI in the engineering value chain. And like many of you, I am an engineer. And like some of you, I am in the older generation. And I started out when you were part of a team collaborating very, very actively to try and accomplish some task. And so I'm looking at this for a variety of reasons. And one of them is perhaps this notion that if we're going to reindustrialize this country, as is one of sort of the popular tropes, but I actually think it's necessary, how are we going to do this if you know the engineering functions have become so balkanized? So as I said, so when I started, as a chip designer, you would stand around like a giant light table together, working on things, trying to actually figure out how things would be routed. And today, a modern engineer can be, reasonably productive as an individual. But there's this continuum that started out when, if you go back to the 40s and 50s or 60s even, herds of people around drafting boards, or in the case of electronics, around designing circuits. And then, early in the course of my career, CAD of various flavors, whether it was for ECAD or mechanical design, CAD came into play, and an engineer became quite productive in and of themselves at a workstation. And now there's this opportunity where I believe that you're going to see in very short order engineers coordinating large amounts of AI agents to accomplish very sophisticated projects. So one of the things that I've done, which I've really been enjoyed, is I've gone out and I've interviewed, as have many of my other fellows, the leaders in the AI space. So I've talked to Sam Altman and to Dario and to Jan LeCun and asked them their thoughts about things. And there's one really kind of startlingly good conclusion, which I'll get to at the very end. But here's the way I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about if you start with this idea that research is generally a siloed practice that moves into design and simulation and prototype verification and production, and then obviously through the life cycle of a product. All of those have been treated as very discrete activities. And my thesis here is that all of those are going to get smushed together in some interesting way. And there are hundreds of companies who have signed up to this idea, and some of them are actually, there's sort of a few of them that are actually worth chatting about, just to give you context here. So there's this whole section on research, and the companies that I've thrown up there are all focused in one way, shape, or form on materials, whether that's for pharmaceuticals or for physical materials. But just to give you an example, you've all heard the problem of batteries not working well in cold weather, and that is a function of the efficiency of the electrolyte. And the way a new electrolyte is developed historically is that a physical chemist uses his or her expertise. They try 20 or 30 ideas. Some of them work better than others, and then they pick the best one and make it. Aeonics is using really interesting quantum field theory to discover something on the order of 11 billion compounds simultaneously, and in 2 months they made an electrolyte for GM that worked down at -90. If you look on the design side, a company like Infinite Form can go through all of the variations of manufacturing processes. It can take a CAD model and show you within seconds what it looks like as a casting or an additively made part or a machined part or perhaps a forging. And that kind of design flexibility has attracted customers from all over the world, starting with NASA. Simulation, similarly, Beyond Math, working with every Formula One team. Quote from the McLaren people, 43 seconds of Beyond Math replaced 100 hours of supercomputer time. Lambda doing PLM for semiconductor design on the verification side. It's pulling 3 months out of complex chip design. That's on the order of about $100 million of value. So every one of these steps is really interesting, and this is just the beginning. What you're going to start to see, I believe, is a very coherent view of the design process, where a singular engineer is going to have a much more informed, much rounder understanding of the landscape that they're operating in, and also how the handoffs work from the design side through to the manufacturing and the support side. Today, if you think about what happens after a product is made, support is a completely separate activity, and even tracking things like, for example, vehicle recalls is a nightmare. I think all of this somehow gets a lot better very soon. And so what you're starting to see is what I'm calling the ChatGPT moment for hardware. And I predict you're going to see things like solo founders creating very, very large companies with great technical complexity. And the punchline that I was so excited about when I was talking to some of the leaders in AI, the comment that I got was, we are enabling the new age of polymaths. And I find that super exciting, because what I think has happened over the last couple of decades is everybody has gotten hyper specialized in their domain, whether you're a semiconductor physicist or you're a thermodynamicist. And now all of a sudden we're going to enable people who are curious and smart and capable and perhaps quantitative to create products and services and features along a continuum that go beyond perhaps their own specific educational domain. Thanks so much.
Kockelman from UT Austin, who is also visiting us here for the semester at MIT, and brings Bhuvan and I bananas and tasty treats. So we like her. Please.
Do I get this? Okay. Thank you. Yeah, it's been great being here this semester. Such a lovely view, though. I've seen a lot of the Charles, but this is one of the best that you're going to have. Sorry that it's a little dark out right now. I've been, I guess, thinking about this topic for a couple years because when we travel, whether it's by car, walking, biking, you see so many terrible behaviors and you hear about so many terrifying things out there. And of course, the police have been asked to stand down in many locations around the country, and many other countries have taken off with automated enforcement. But in this freedom-loving country of ours, we haven't gone to that yet, except in a couple places. And as David was talking about, it really should be a lot more popular given how unsafe the roads tend to be these days. So there's a lot of tools that you can pick up on Amazon and, get information on decibels or pollution or on speed and these kinds of things. And so it's just looking at that and making it a lot easier, a lot more accessible to all of us, because we really have bad drivers and higher speeds, of course, and less, I guess our culture is not as safety oriented as you might think it would be, even though we used to lead the world in safety in the design of the vehicles and kind of the licensing of our drivers, and now we really lag, especially if you're walking. You are much more likely to get killed out there than you would be if you were walking in another country. And that's true across the border in Canada as well. So, very close. I'm not sure about Mexico, but our peers typically. And so speeding's, one of the many things, and it's not that hard as Adam was talking about all the amazing things that these new tools can do. It shouldn't be that hard. So, Adam, I hope you'll point me to somebody to help us with our code stack, or anybody else in the room who'd like to help us with the vision language models that we've got to try to infer from just a standard phone camera or a dash cam, which might go for $100 on the front of your vehicle and just take imagery all the time for you, just like it does in the Uber and the Lyfts that you call on maybe to get here this morning. So many states allow it. Some states are getting a lot more aggressive with it because they're seeing how badly we lag. Our peers, like California now, is pushing it a bit more, but it's Washington, D.C. and New York, I think, and maybe Portland, Oregon, and Chicago that are the big leaders for this country. And of course, if you go abroad, many people don't even want to rent a car anymore in Europe because they're so afraid they're going to rack up a bunch of fees from violating the posted speed limits by just 1 kilometer per hour out there. So your smartphone's, something that I hope you've been using to report potholes or really bad behavior that you've seen. There's 311, there's apps for 311. So this is just a new take on that and trying to make that accessible. I'm sorry that the floating meeting controls are overlapping with some of my titles here, but this says, large language models to the rescue. And as you can imagine, just identifying the objects of interest. There may be multiple vehicles in a frame, and the plates on them, the makes, the models, the colors, the approximate speeds, and then hopefully moving on to weaving. Adam and anybody else who can point me to useful people for that. That should be simple given how amazing all these other tools are that we've been hearing about. And the speed is tough though, because these are handheld and moving cameras. They're not stationary, because we're trying to get past, like I live in Texas, right, a red state, and we're not allowed to have nice things like speed enforcement. I think one of our senators got a speeding ticket in DC, and his retribution for that was to make sure that we couldn't have them anymore in Texas. So we don't have red light cameras, but many of you do, and of course we all have cell phone cameras, and I don't think they're going to stop me from using mine and yours anytime soon. So DC's got over 500, New York's got over 2,000, and they vary depending on the application. It's about 9 cameras per square mile if you divide this up across this small District of Columbia. And they're paying right now the lowest price that I've seen, which is a lot more expensive than my cell phone, right? And my cell phone can be anywhere. And so these are point-based typically. They're not mobile, so that limits them. But it is all included practically, except for the administrative staffing and the enforcement mechanism, which is they will eventually go boot your car or take your vehicle if you rack up enough fines, but they can't take your vehicle if you live and register in Maryland. So just remember that if you're planning to break a lot of laws on the road in DC. And yeah, so it's not easy to enforce, but they've seen, a lot of benefits from this. Immediately, speeds coming down that are much closer to the posted speed limit, and certainly lower crashes now too, even with COVID in there for several years. So there are other things like smog and pollution and noise, of course, merging and weaving, I should say, and tailgating and other kinds of bad behaviors, trucks that don't have the right licensing. I can't believe Pennsylvania doesn't require licenses on the front of those vehicles yet. It's just $15 to add one in case you are registered there. I really think you should. This is just a $30 tool on Amazon that you can get to get a good sense. And I know it's not of the caliber that might hold up in a court of law, but I do think that we should be alerting the enforcement agencies, and they should be writing to the registered vehicle owners for all of this. It's not that hard, as long as they don't mess with their license plate, which some cops do in New York. Okay, well, I think that's about it, except I did want to let you know that some are offering bounties, like South Korea and New York famously offers a quarter of the charge for those idling diesel trucks. And feel free to reach out to me and have a glass of wine with me later today. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Still awake and hanging in there. So we're gonna, I ran a state Department of Transportation, and then I had the pleasure of interacting with dozens of them when I was at the Federal Highway Administration. And my current area of interest goes beyond transportation, because it really asks this question that a lot of people are asking. So we're going to talk later about abundance. I feel like we've sort of diagnosed it to death, like how did we get to where we are? We've sort of described what it might look like in the future. I am interested in how we get from where we are to where we want to be. So my research was focused on what has been called state capacity, right? So this is my little cheat sheet on what is the difference between abundance and state capacity. So abundance is a destination. State capacity is the vehicle that gets us there. You'll note it is an electric vehicle. A lot of people talk about like permitting reform. Permitting and I would argue actually also procurement are the things that actually take the state capacity car and kind of drive it to the wrong side of the choice that we have to make. Because they tie things up to the point where we can't get to abundance. But in addition, there is a choice point. And so my sort of third step in the process of getting from state capacity to abundance is actually you have to make a decision at some point. And we're not really great at that. Jen Palka and I talk a lot about waterfall decision making. Ezra Klein talks about it in terms of trade-off denial and what he calls the everything bagel problem. But you gotta make a decision. So I'm starting at the beginning of the road, which is everybody says we have to have more state capacity to get anywhere on the road toward abundance, but what is that? We don't really define it, we don't measure it. So if you really wanted to define and measure state capacity, you'd have to do three things, right? The first thing is you would have to sort of take an agency at the state or local level and ask what are the things it needs to be good at doing. The second thing that you would need to do is to say, well, I'm not going to just sort of compare 50 states to each other because states are really different, right? So how do I group states in ways that I can tell Maine you should be looking at Tennessee or you should be looking at Wyoming if you're trying to sort of compare yourself to someone? And then the last piece would be you would then take all the functions you've defined and all the cohorts you've defined and you'd put data underneath each function and then you actually have sort of a metric. So I focused on the first two steps in this process. So the first question is, how do you define state capacity in a meaningful way? And so after reading literature and talking to a bunch of people who've run agencies, came to the conclusion that you need to get specific about things agencies need to do, and you can divide these into two kinds. One I call core functions, some people call them backroom functions. These are the four things I would argue every competent government agency needs to be able to do, and it's not just like workforce and talent, which is like a high level, you actually have to define these at a specific enough level so that you can eventually collect data and measure them, right? So instead of we need talent, it's you need to recruit, train, and retain a talented, adequately sized, and appropriately compensated workforce, because you can then start to break that down, right? I need data on compensation, I need data on size, I need data on retention rates, right? You'll notice there's a data and technology one in that it's under core competencies, because I think as of 2025, the ability to use data to inform decision making and use technology to improve both internal function and the external transportation system is in fact a core competency that a transportation agency needs to have. So these are the 4 all agencies should have functions. And then the paper goes through 8 other functions which are more specific to transportation, obviously beginning with safety, because we all know that that's job 1, and including things like capital budgeting, the ability to put together a budget that's consistent with performance and policy objectives, and which selects projects that you're going to fund with both transparency and purpose, and you can, happy to share the paper with you. It goes into detail on all 8. So that's the first half of the paper, and it was using literature, and it was also talking to people who had run state transportation agencies to get the sort of specifics down so that we had data categories we could use. And then the second half of this was, how would you, Adi Tomer at Brookings actually uses this as a verb, as in to cohort. So how would you cohort, right, the 50 states plus DC, which is a state for this purpose? And so what I ended up with, I looked at about 30 data fields that both seemed to have something to do with the things state transportation agencies do, but also that there was data available for, and ended up coming to the conclusion that there were a few dividing lines that made the biggest difference. So one is places that are growing and places that are not growing need different kinds of transportation agencies. So the average population growth rate over 15 years ending in 2024 for all states in the US is 0.5% per year, right? But there's a group of states where the growth rate was 1% per year over that same 15 years. So they're growing twice the national average. So they are different places. I'll show you the map in a second. The second group of states were states that had a lot of transit users, because state transportation departments are increasingly multimodal. Sadly, there's not a lot of states, but there are some that have, a statewide transit mode share, not a city or a metro. The third factor, huge factor in the transportation world, is rural versus urban, and what percentage of your population, but also your road network, is rural versus urban, because those are 2 different things, and they're both measured. Population density turns out to be really important, so low density places versus medium density places. And overall size of both the state, but not population. This is transportation networks. Physical size. And what you end up with, and this is the last slide, is 5 groups of states. So the green in here is the states that are growing. The yellow are large and rural and low density. The gray ones are the only states in the country that have more than a 3% public transportation mode share for commuting. The purple states are the sort of medium density, medium size, medium urbanized states, and then the orange states are also rural but much smaller in both land area and transportation network than the yellow. So those are the 5 cohorts, and appreciate everybody listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, this story begins with 2 things. One, concern and frustration, and one being wrong. I'll come back to where I was wrong. So if you made it this far today, then you should not be surprised by this chart. You should not be content with this chart. And you should be as concerned and frustrated as I am. Fatalities are just too high in the United States on our roads. So this is the interactive portion, because again, it's been a full day. So quick show of hands. Everybody here who has a license, driver's license, issued from somewhere in the United States, please raise your hand. Keep those hands raised if you had to pass a road test to get it. Everybody stayed. And then last, you can drop your hands, but take a moment and think. I can barely remember, but I can remember. If you remember your road test, think about it emotionally. Were you scared? Were you stressed? Was it important to you? Did it feel meaningful? And the answer for most people is yes. I've had teenagers go through it. So my research is about that process and this slide and why something that feels so important may not be that important and what it really means in the history of the road test and really where we should go. So we actually know a lot. This is just one slide. We know what it means to be a teen and a new driver. It doesn't go great. New drivers have distinct risks. This is just to show you it's not just that new drivers are not the best. They tend to be the worst. We actually know what they're not good at, and we know what those risks are. So a couple quick things. I just want to baseline, spent the year talking to people in this industry, the history. There's a few things that we need to go through. And keep in the back of your mind this morning what we talked about in the future as we onboard autonomy. Each year we get, and the numbers are a little bit variable, last year, the estimate is probably a minimum of 1.8 million new drivers. For context, we had 1.3 EVs sold in the United States in 2024, and there's about 700 Waymos on the streets of the United States operating today. We're giving licenses to a lot of new drivers for the foreseeable future with our existing fleet or where the fleets go. Giving licenses matters, and it matters for the safety chart I showed. Despite what you think, and all of you raised your hands, or most of you raised your hands, you took a road test, there is no road test. There is no law. There is no federal requirement. It is 50 states. More interestingly, those 50 states did not one day wake up and do it. They gave that, Rhode Island in 1908 came up with the first test, and then over the next 30 years, states slowly came up with their own process. What's even stranger is they're pretty consistent. There's differences, but they're not that different. Stephanie just showed you how different our states are and the different things they have. But the road test is pretty consistent. And they've been remarkably stable. Those of you who raised your hands, the test you took is the same one that my 18-year-old took a year and a half ago. It really hasn't changed with very, very few things. And last, this is costly. It takes time, it takes money, there is fraud, there are risks. So it's a choice that we make. Whoops. So, I was wrong. And the reason why I was wrong is in the first few days of the pandemic, the road test was suspended in Georgia. It's hard to do things. And they decided to just give licenses without a road test. They came back to it pretty quickly. But Mississippi still doesn't give a road test. The practice stopped. And when you look at the data, which I did, you can't see the difference. It doesn't mean that it goes well. It just means that you can't see the difference. And then the more important thing that's going on is our cars, our vehicles, the technology, we spent a day talking about it, are changing. Someone referred to the car as a rolling mobile phone early this morning. Our cars are really different. This is the car of a 1960s Mustang. You'll notice the manual driving. And again, we're short on time, so I'm going to go quick. It looks really different. There are a lot of different things going on there. And again, the reason why I just passed, but I was wrong, is the road test, when I looked at it and went through the findings, there is no meaningful research or history as to the road test that most of you have taken across the United States, that it has a predictive role in safety, and that was when it started, and that's when we are today. The other question here, which I took from a 2008 study that was done in New Jersey, does the ability to parallel park, perform a K-turn, use turn signals, brake smoothly, among other things, mean that a novice is ready to drive unsupervised? And the answer is absolutely not. It doesn't. What works? So, again, we're short on time. We know what works. This has been proven over time. Restrictions on nighttime, restrictions on use of car, these work. Where do we go from here? And just to quickly seed a few things. We can take what works and graduate a driver's license and work with the phones and technology we have and begin to build a more modern driving system. We can work with insurers, and we can work on the private sector side, just like we manage fleets and combine telematics, tier licensing, and we can think about privacy and data models. Who is the owner of that data? Who is the owner of your driving record in the car? We need to rethink it, because I'm not satisfied with how we're doing, and there's no evidence that giving out a license to a teenager has anything to do with safety. I'll just add here, if you see the cockpit of a car, and use the cockpit meaningfully, aviation went through this. They changed the role from pilot to supervisor. The job of the pilot is to supervise the plane and its systems. And applying that model to a modern car with, full self-driving or any of the other ADAS features, that is a way forward potentially for safety and to better train and better teach what the appropriate role for drivers are. We have lots of other things we can talk about in simulation and perception training, and there's a lot of research because the federal government actually did a reform for CDLs and actually worked. And we could apply that backwards to a new road test. But the status quo does not work. There's no research for it. And that we need to reimagine this because we are giving out licenses to teens for the foreseeable future. And it is the reason why you see the 40,000 fatalities on roads, because we don't do a good enough job teaching safety, even if the AVs add 0 to the mix.